Oh, I've done the mobile phones bits. Members of the public, welcome. I hope you're all very friendly tonight and aren't going to cause us any trouble. So but it's nice to have you here and taking an interest in the planning process. So on to the main items of business. Item 1 is minutes of the last meeting. The minutes have been on the table there for the last 30 minutes. Are you happy that I sign them as a true record? Great. Thank you very much. Apologies for absence, Amy.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Mike Brand, Mary Foraszewski, Michael Goodridge, Jeanette Stennett and Stuart Stennett.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest?
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Mike Brand has declared a non-pecuniary interest in item A1. He considers this interest to have sufficient weight to undermine his ability to be seen to make an open-minded and objective decision. However, he's already given apologies for this meeting.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the public?
None received, Chairman.
Steve, have we any relevant updates to government guidance or legislation since the last meeting, knowing very well that we have? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. All councillors will be aware that since our last meeting, we've of course adopted the Part 1 local plan, and that now forms the development plan for the area and is reflected in your reports, which were prepared following its adoption. We do still have retained policies in the 2002 local plan, and where we do have retained policies that are of relevance, then the degree of weight will be explained where that needs to happen. So that's really good news. It reflects an awful lot of hard work on everybody's part, I know, in bringing that forward. And obviously we move on now to part 2, or the policy team do anyway. So that's the first item. The second item, just really for members to note, I'm sure everybody picked up on the Prime Minister's speech on Monday, that there is a consultation just commencing now in respect of changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. The consultation is open, it's running until the 10th of May. And I'm not going to give you a blow-by-blow account of it because it runs to quite a lot of pages, and they're consolidating previous changes that have come forward to the NPPF as well as some new ideas. So if you wish to avail yourselves of it, it's available to have a look at on the gov.uk website, and Waverley will be providing a formal response in due course. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Would you like to continue with performance against government targets? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. If I can take members to page 5 of their order papers. This provides, as you know, this is now a sort of a standing item at area committees where we set out how Waverley's planning team is performing against government targets on 2 criteria, speed and quality, and that's in respect of both major and non-major applications. I spoke to this at last month's meeting, and what you've got there is the update reflecting the additional information or results that have come through in the period to the end of January. I don't have the end of February figures just yet. That'll be for next time. So just to draw out where we are, picking up on speed first. As you can see, performance in respect of both majors and non-majors is in excess of 98%. That's significantly above the government targets, and it reflects a lot of hard work, a lot of collaborative work as well between councillors, officers, and those making applications. So I think the team are to be very much commended on that set of results, and it's a slight improvement actually on where we were at the end of December. So really good news there. On quality, so a reminder that quality relates to the number of overturned appeals as a proportion of the total number of applications made in the categories of either majors or non-majors. If I start with non-majors, you can see there the target is 10% or less, and at the close of the assessment period, we were at 1.56%, so no problems there. And again, if you look at our best estimate, if the figures were to be run for April to the end of January, we'd be at 1.74%. So again, comfortably below target, which is a good thing. And I don't really see that being a problem going forward, and I'll be very surprised if many authorities do. The situation as regards major decisions is a more challenging one for us. We've had a number of cases that have gone to appeal that have been allowed in the face of the council's refusals. The assessment period actually closed at the end of December. So where we were at the end of December was at 5.6%. So we weren't in risk in relation to the target of 10. What you've got in that figure, though, is just how things would have played out if decisions that have come in since the end of December had been taken into account. And you can see that we've still got 7 major appeals still outstanding. We've had 3 decisions since the end of December, all of which have been overturns, and that's bumped the figure up from where we were at the end of the year, 5.6%, up to 8.8%. So because of the lesser number of applications, one overturn makes a more significant impact in relation to the total. We don't have the next assessment period yet released to us from government, so on the best estimate, we've simply got a picture there of how many major applications have we determined and how many appeals have been overturned. We're not comparing eggs with eggs because the appeals aren't in respect of the decisions, which is the way the stats are actually configured. So, but again, you can see that the way the trajectory is moving, it is moving upwards, and we do need to keep an eye on that. But with a local plan in place, an up-to-date local plan in place, that gives us a much better footing if applications are refused to actually to demonstrate we've got up-to-date local plan information and policies to back up refusals, although obviously they still have to withstand scrutiny. But as I say, we're keeping an eye on that. We'll be looking very closely when the next assessment period is released from the government, but that's just the emerging picture at this stage as a sort of direction of travel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. It's very informative. Thanks. Right, so we move on to the main item of business tonight, which is item A1, application reference WA 2017-2163, and the proposal is the erection of a dwelling and garage following demolition of existing dwelling and garage at Skemilmere, Woodhill Lane, Shamley Green, GU5 0SP. And I think Catherine's going to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The application site is located to the south of Woodhill Lane, and as you can see, it's there. There's a large pond to the rear of the property, and the land does sort of slightly slope down towards that pond. On site at the moment there is a 2-storey detached dwelling along with an attached garage and a separate detached outbuilding. This is the front elevation which faces north towards Woodhill Lane, and this is the rear elevation which is south facing over the garden. There is an existing structure at the rear of the dwelling which the applicant claims is the PD extension, which was granted pursuant to a certificate under WA 2017-1504. However, it's not finished in terms of its external appearance at the moment. It's clad in timber boarding, which would not comply with the requirements of Class A of the GPDO. So therefore, at this stage, this can't be confirmed to be a lawful structure. Nonetheless, that extant certificate is a material consideration to which members can attach due weight as they see fit. These are the existing elevations of the property, just reflecting what you've seen in the photographs. So the application is to replace the existing dwelling and garage. As you can see, the replacement dwelling would have this sort of butterfly form with the 2 wings projecting at either side. I'll take you through the elevation. So this is the north elevation facing Woodhill Lane, side elevation, the opposite side elevation, and this is the rear elevation viewed head-on. So obviously these wings are angled away from the property. This is an illustrative plan provided by the applicant of the front elevation and a comparison plan provided by the applicant. So the red image here is the existing built form, and obviously set further back in the background of this is the proposed dwelling. Just for your ease, there is a copy here of the comparison table that you'll find within your agenda papers, showing the increase in the size of the replacement dwelling. As you can see, and as you'll note from the officer's report, the majority of the increases would be to the bulk and mass of the dwelling at first floor level, which is wherein the concerns of officers lie. There is a written update for members to note, which just clarifies the information with regards to that extension that I've mentioned at the start of this presentation. And just a further verbal update, it's been brought to our attention there's a small error in the report. Page 18, which is the biodiversity section of the report, says the site is not within 200 metres of water. It is, obviously, there is the pond at the rear, so that is an error for which we apologise. However, the application has been accompanied by an ecological survey, which has been assessed by the Wildlife Trust, and no concerns have been raised subject to a condition in that respect. So the matters for members to exercise their planning judgment on this evening are the size and scale of the replacement building and its compliance with Greenbelt policy, and obviously the impact of the development on the landscape character and visual amenities of the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Now, this is a public speaking item, and I would invite Rob Merriman, the supporter, to join us down here at the microphones. I understand the procedure has been explained to you and that you have 4 minutes from when you start speaking. Thank you.
Good evening. We agree with the case officer's conclusions in relation to most of the determining issues and his assessment that the proposal is of better architectural design and that it would enhance the character of the AONB and AGLV owing to improvements on site. This is the main reason why the application has received considerable support, with 23 letters from 18 households, including many of the immediate neighbours, and no objections from the public or Wonersh Parish Council. We do not agree, however, that the building is materially larger. The proposal is to replace an existing 5-bedroom house with a new 5-bedroom house. The 8% increase in floor area is comfortably below the 10% guideline set out in the Council's own policy, RD2A. The volume is 13% bigger, but there is no set materiality guideline for volume. Most of this volume increase is below the existing ground level, and so it will not make the building appear any bigger. The design is of high quality using natural materials, including an oak frame and local stone, which will have less visual impact and blend much more sympathetically into the landscape compared with the current building, which has a lot of very prominent white render. Consequently, it will enhance the rural character of the area. The assessment of this case therefore comes down to RD2AC, that it will not appear more intrusive in the landscape or otherwise detract from the rural character of the area. The case officer agrees that the proposal would enhance the character of the site, and so certainly it doesn't detract from it. Furthermore, the design, perspective and positioning mean that it would not appear more intrusive in the landscape. Two-dimensional elevations do not reflect how the butterfly shape with its 45-degree corners would actually be perceived. For example, when viewed from the front of the house, the butterfly wings slope away and so will have less apparent bulk than a classic box-shaped property. Individual measurements are also potentially misleading. Some suggest that the proposal is bigger, while others indicate that it is smaller or a similar size. We have supplied perspective drawings, which have been shown today, plus one from the rear, which are a much better guide as to how the building will actually appear. During design, 3 key steps were taken to reduce the visual impact of the building. lowering it into the ground by 0.5 metre, moving it 3 metres further away from the road, and the choice of subtle materials that blend into the landscape. After submission and following discussions with the case officer, further changes were made to remove the proposed balconies and to lower the ridge height of the wings as far as possible without compromising the design. A considerable number of mature native trees have already been planted, which will help to screen the house from view. The proposal is also consistent with the objectives of Greenbelt policy set out in MPPF paragraph 80. For example, it very much supports the goals of preserving the setting and special character of historic towns and assisting in urban regeneration by encouraging the recycling of derelict and other urban land. The existing building has little architectural merit, is in severe need of modernising, and has some structural issues. Recycling this urban land into a beautiful new and sustainable property therefore contributes positively to this objective. In summary, there are many positive aspects of this proposal which have been endorsed by the planning officer and a large number of local residents. The new dwelling is not materially larger according to the council's own guidance, and the high quality, low visual impact design ensures that it will not appear materially larger. We believe that the application is consistent with Greenbelt policy and its objectives, and so we ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merriman. Members. Thank you for rescuing me, Councillor Danis.
That's no problem, Chair. And this is a really difficult one because you've got an old building that doesn't look particularly nice with a nice looking building. I would like some clarity from the case officer about the sizes and the increases, because there seems to be some sort of debate on what percentages are and what is acceptable. So that would be really useful in a minute. I suppose the one thing that gives me concern is this obviously in the green belt. We have to look at whether there is harm to the openness of the green belt and whether there's special circumstances. And although in looking at it, yes, it's much better than what's there, but I'm not sure I've heard the evidence to show that this meets the special circumstances for building, you know, in the green belt. And I'm not convinced with the sizes and the increases. So hopefully if that's clarified, that might help my thinking on this. And I look forward to seeing what my colleagues say.
Officers, would you like to respond to that? And then I'll come to Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. With regards to the percentages, the percentages in your agenda on pages 14 and 15, perhaps if I put them up on screen as well. So the test that you're looking at is the existing building, and is this materially larger? In terms of floor space, there would be an increase of 8.3% or 36.65. But that takes into account the existing structure that is there on the site that the applicant contends is pursuant to a certificate of lawfulness and is permitted development. We take a slightly different view on that, I think, in that it's not finished in materials to match the existing dwelling, and therefore do we think that that actually is a permitted development extension? I think we'd have to probably say, as built, no, we don't think it is. The volume percentage, which is the mass of the building, there would be an increase of 13.7%. However, I think the critical thing to look at is how that is represented. Policy RD2A, the 10% referred to, was part of the supporting text to the policy, which is not saved. The wording of the policy is retained, but the supporting guidance is not. And going forward, it will much more be a subjective assessment on the bulk and mass and height and all of those factors altogether that indicate whether a building is materially larger or not. So it is a helpful measure to have percentages and floor space, but what you're looking at is the bulk and mass of the building and how that really manifests itself as opposed to what is there at the moment and is lawful. Our concern is that we acknowledge the design of the building, it's a high quality. all design needs to be of a high quality, so that doesn't make it very special. The concern is that that floor space has occurred mainly at first floor level. One of the key tests for the Greenbelt, as you know, is openness and preserving that openness. Arguably, by increasing the bulk and mass of a building at first floor, you are increasing or decreasing openness. That's a subjective assessment and one which you have to satisfy yourselves on this evening. You're entitled to disagree with us, but in doing so you have to reach one of two conclusions. First of all, that you think the development is not compliant with Greenbelt policy, i.e. it is materially larger, and that there are no very special circumstances. Alternatively, if you consider the development to be acceptable, you need to conclude either one of two things. First of all, that it's not materially larger and therefore is policy compliant, or that it is materially larger but there is something very special about this proposal that allows you to set aside that strict policy of restraint. So those are the options that are available to members this evening in order to make a sound planning decision.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. My question on this is really along the same lines as Councillor Denis's. It's very clear to us what the options are. What's not absolutely clear to me yet is the significance of the extension and its impact on the interpretation of the policy. So we're being told that the extension is not deemed lawful, but equally we were told that the certificate of lawfulness to carry it out is still in place, and we should pay attention to that. So does the extension area that we're being quoted, what number are we supposed to use? Are we supposed to use the number that we've been given in the document, or given the fact that it's not deemed to be a legal extension yet, should there be another number on which we base our judgment? I just want to get this right from the perspective of supporting our policies. You know, if the policy says one thing and we're obliged to follow it, that's fine, I'll follow it. If it's purely a matter of judgment, then I reach a different conclusion. Thank you, Chairman.
Kat.
Thank you. I thought you might ask that question. So the permitted development extension at the rear, which is the one that we are most sort of questioning, I believe has a footprint of around 60 square metres. If you take that in addition to obviously the 36.65% square metre increase, obviously we're talking about twice as much again in percentage terms. So it would give you an increase of around 90 odd square metres, which as a percentage would probably be about 30% increase. The tricky point is obviously there is an extant certificate which indicates that something of that size and scale, perhaps not in the form that it's currently erected, could be built on the site. I hope that clarifies it for you. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Seaborn, do you wish to come back?
If I may, I think I understand that, but you know, the point I was trying to make is I want to be absolutely clear that in reaching a conclusion, we would not be going against our own policies. So, you know, which number are we obliged to use?
Catherine, do you want
It
to come back
depends
on
how
that
much
one?
weight you want to attach to the fallback position of the PD extension, whether you consider it to be 8% or closer to, I don't know, 30 odd percent. Thank you.
I suppose it would be true to say that they could build that extension as permitted development with brick externally, and we wouldn't be having this conversation then, would we? No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the policy RD2, the policy has to be taken as a whole. So from a point of view of planning, in my mind, we are taking each of those points A, B and C all together. And it does appear that this development is materially larger than what was there before. I note what's said about the permitted development. and the officer saying that it could be permitted development, but I must base my decision on what is there today myself. The structure that is there did not appear to be in the biodiversity report, the pictures in the biodiversity report. I don't remember seeing that extension on the back in that report. So it appears to be maybe a recent structure, and it is not complete. And it is not, from my point of view at this moment in time, got a certificate. So I have to take it as it is today. And it appears to me that although this could be permitted development, at this particular moment in time when I'm considering this application, it is not permitted development and hasn't got a certificate of lawfulness. And also, I cannot at this moment in time see what very special circumstances exist to permit this particular property, and I would welcome any other comments from members on that point. It does seem that we do need to protect the little bit of protection that we've got for our countryside and for the Greenbelt and in our policies, and the point of them is to be able to protect areas, and it does seem that if we ignore that, we could be faced with other applications that perhaps also might contravene this policy in the future. Anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Well, nobody yet has mentioned the site visit, which I missed, but then went back and found where I was supposed to be. Councillor Townsend didn't quite make it either. Great problem in finding the site. But nevertheless, I found it very worthwhile going back. I'm very glad that I did. We've discussed all the sizes and things, which I'll perhaps come on to a little bit in a minute. But I'm sure there are more ugly dwellings around in the countryside somewhere. I think that was probably one at the top of the list. It didn't appear to have any proper formal entrance. The front door had no status whatsoever. The back end was dark and dingy. The only redeeming feature about the back end was that the applicant has clearly spent a lot of time and care creating a new fence. Sounds rather silly, but it is a beautiful fence. I have to commend them on that wonderful fence and how beautifully it's made. It's all been built on site. They've denuded two hillsides of woodland to make it. I'm joking, of course, but it's a lot of work and it's very good. I then took the opportunity of walking up, or driving up, in fact, up the hill to have a look down onto the side, because there are the dwellings that look at that side are high up. And it's worthwhile seeing that and seeing the effect of the existing building and visualising the effect of the proposed new building, which is of much superior design. In the paperwork, of course, we've got a point that was put forward for a heritage asset, an undesignated heritage asset, was it called, or something in that line. I can't imagine who would have put that forward in any form, whether the new temporary, what is clearly a temporary extension on the front was or not. It has no significance whatsoever to me as a building. It's a 50s/60s oblong block with no real features that I could see which are anything to deal with. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with regard to the sizes. We could perversely, we may choose to refuse the application on the basis the extension that is there is not complete and therefore is not lawful, which would mean that the applicant would then have the choice of either accepting that situation and walking away, or indeed building out that particular extension and then repeating the same application, which would then clearly fit exactly with what we're doing. In terms of the openness of the countryside, as you go up on the hillside and look down, you're looking down on a property, and the new property would be in the same place with the tree line behind it, the road which is clearly just behind, although they've moved the building forward, and lots of other trees, etc. behind it. So it would blend into the countryside, and the new trees that they have planted out into the grounds and the work they're doing clearly will improve everything within there. So overall, I'm supportive of the application. I think it's one that I would see as being a very worthwhile change and improvement to that area of Shamley Green and the countryside.
Thank you. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. I did get an opportunity of going to the site visit, and I thought that was extremely useful. I am in a bit of a quandary about this. With regard to the certificate of lawfulness, which was granted in 2017, but says was not implemented. Yet there was a structure there, albeit obviously not conventional and and certainly not finished, because there were the outside walls within the structure. So I find that a bit difficult to contend with. However, having been on the site visit, the proposed build, the replacement build, is such a change from what's there at the moment. I mean, the possibilities improving a very poorly designed 1950s house is an impossibility. And it would seem from the planning history that over the years, the various owners have done their best to sort of bring it into the 20th or even the 21st century, but they've sort of got stuck. And from what I was able to see on my site visit, it's obviously quite neglected. As a fellow councillor said, there was no particular way in. However, the boundary fencing is superb. The boundary hill fencing that's obviously been constructed on site is amazing. With regard to the heritage asset, I think we're talking about the owner rather than the property, a former owner rather than the property, I think. But I'll be put to rights on that. I did walk up and down Wood Hill Lane, and yeah, there's quite a selection of buildings there, whether they belong to Shamley Green Estate or whether they're private homes, and there's quite an eclectic selection of buildings up there. With regard to overlooking, I don't believe that there is too much overlooking, but that's my perspective on it. I believe that there is some way to go with regard to landscaping. There didn't seem to be very much of a defined, developed area around the house. But I'll leave it there and see if the officers can come back to me with regard to the unpermitted or unimplemented certificate of lawfulness granted in 2017, and hear what other people have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Catherine, do you wish to respond to that?
What you can see on screen is a structure. What you need to ask yourselves is, are you satisfied that that is an unfinished structure, that in the event planning permission is refused this evening would be kept and clad, and to all intents and purposes would be able to comply with the GPDO? That's a judgment you need to make, really. Our view is that that is not the same beast for which a certificate has been granted. And in its current form, with cladding, would not be permitted development. The materiality, therefore, is significantly less than had they got a structure there which fully complied with the general permitted development. So it's that sliding scale of weight that you attach to what's there. And just to confirm, yes, the historic interest is by association with a former owner, not its architectural appearance. Thank you, Chairman. Hope that helps.
Just to expand on that, Councillor Henry, one of the conditions of an extension being considered permitted development is that materials shall match the existing house, and that's why this doesn't comply with the certificate of lawfulness. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened carefully to all my colleagues. I didn't have the advantage of going to a site visit, although I think I've got quite a lot of flavour from the people who do. I think it's been established there's no special circumstances for this size and building, and this question of whether the permitted development is finished or not seems quite a difficult one in some ways. The new design seems quite interesting and exciting in lots of respects, and a great improvement over the existing building. So I'm minded to say that would be quite considerably influencing any decision I made on this. Also, the neighbour support, I think, is particularly of interest as well. I mean, I think the number of times that we've said that we'd look to see what the neighbourhood comments, where there's a file balance to be drawn. I think that I think it's difficult. I'm still slightly confused. If this extension had been properly clad, if it was approved, would that make a difference to the officer's recommendation? That's the simple question I would like. I think you probably said it before, but it wasn't clear enough for me in my current state to understand. So if it was approved, if it had a certificate, would it make any difference to your recommendation? Thank you.
Catherine, would you like to address that?
Thank you, Chairman. No, the figures that you've got in your report take account of what's built there. So the figure of 8.7% for the floor space takes account of that as an existing structure, albeit we say we don't think that's actually the permitted development scheme. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Members, anybody else like to comment before we move to the recommendation, which is that permission be refused for the reasons set out on page 19 of the agenda report? Can I have all those in favour of that recommendation, please? And those against?
1, 2, 3, 4. Chairman.
Any abstentions?
1. Chairman.
Thank you. So that recommendation isn't approved, so we need an alternative recommendation. Please, from somebody.
That permission be granted.
I'll happily second that, but I think from what Catherine said earlier, we have to agree that we don't consider that it is materially larger, or that it is materially larger but very special circumstances exist. So I would suggest that we do not consider that it is materially larger. Can I have your thoughts on that, please?
I agree with that conclusion.
Councillor Henry.
I think we've, thank you, Chairman. I think we will probably use some of the words out of the conclusion, or I think we might be able to, with the help of the officers, that we are looking at a high quality design in the green belt. I'll leave it there. I'll park it there for a moment.
Okay, Councillor Seaborn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I mean, the point of my earlier probing as to the detail of what is not lawful has just left me with the conclusion that it's almost irrelevant in that whether that structure is lawful or not. The occupants could go back and construct something that is lawful. Therefore, we're left with a footprint that produces an increase for the new designs, which is within our policy guidance, and therefore I think I fully support your conclusion that this is not materially larger than the plans are not materially larger than the existing building. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we have to be careful because the policy guidance isn't carried over to our local plan. It's only the actual policy, not the guidance notes. But officers, have you anything to add to that can help us, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, you are required to give a reason for granting if you go against our recommendation. I would suggest wording along the lines of the proposal is considered not to be materially larger than the dwelling which it replaces, and the proposal would not harm the openness of the green belt or the character and appearance of the wider landscape. The proposal would comply with local plan policy RE2, and retained policy RD2A of the 2002 local plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And then presumably if we're going to vote on this application being granted permission, we will need a set of conditions to be included in the proposal. Can you guide us on that, or are we looking at the standard set of conditions for new houses?
Thank you, Chairman. I do have some suggestions, unless members have anything they would like to raise, first of all. Do you want to... okay, Chairman.
Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. Have we got anything about landscaping?
Catherine is nodding her head, yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll run through my list. You would need a plan numbers condition to tie the development to the submitted plans. A condition requiring the submission of samples of materials prior to commencement of development. A condition requiring architectural details to be provided, including details of new windows, external doors, roof lights, and sections through the roof, chimneys, balustrades and railings. A condition restricting the use of the proposed replacement garage for the garaging of vehicles and domestic storage incidental to the dwelling. A condition tying the development to the ecological survey submitted to be carried out in accordance with the conclusions and recommendations therein. A condition requiring a scheme of tree protection to be submitted along with an arboricultural method statement. A follow-up condition to require a scheme of supervision for those said arboricultural protection measures to be submitted to and approved in writing. Details of levels, so existing and proposed finished ground levels. A condition requiring details of services and drains to be constructed on site. A detailed landscaping scheme, including all soft and hard landscaping. And a condition restricting any further enlargements to the replacement dwelling in respect of classes A and B of the GPDO. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Catherine. Councillor Townsend.
Can I just ask officers, bearing in mind the narrowness of Woodhill Lane there, is it possible for the construction management plan as well to be included in those conditions?
Catherine, Steve.
Yeah, typically for a single dwelling plot, that's less common. I mean, it is at your discretion to impose it or not, but generally for the smaller dwelling plots and with a large site, to accommodate the necessary parking and movements and all the rest of it, it might be difficult to demonstrate that it's a reasonable and necessary condition in order to allow the development to proceed. So my recommendation would be to shy away from that.
Right, so the revised recommendation is that permission be granted for the reasons that Catherine outlined earlier, and I counted up 11 conditions. Is that what, so conditions 1 to 11 as just detailed by Catherine? Can I have all those in favour of permission being granted, please? And those against?
One, Chairman.
That revised recommendation is carried, and I don't think we have any other business this evening, so thank you all for your time.